The incident at Ballplay Creek, Vonore, Tennessee. Ballplay Creek is a tributary of the Little Tennessee River in southern Monroe County, named for the Cherokee stickball grounds that once occupied the bottomland along its banks. In the 1830s, the Cherokee were removed. White settlers took the land and farmed it for a century. In the autumn of 1938, a community of roughly 60 people lived along Ballplay Creek and its adjoining hollows, farming families, mostly, with a church, a one-room school, a general store, and the normal rhythms of rural Appalachian life. By the spring of 1939, the valley was empty. Not a single family remained. The church was locked. The school closed. The store was shuttered. 23 homes stood abandoned, their furnishings still inside. Livestock wandered loose in the pastures. The community had left all of it, all at once, in a single week in late October 1938. No evacuation was ordered, no flood occurred, no mining disaster, no epidemic, no economic collapse drove the people out. They simply left. Most never returned. The Monroe County Sheriff's Office investigated. The state police were consulted. The Tennessee Valley Authority, which was then acquiring land in the region for reservoir projects, became involved because the Ballplay Creek Valley fell within a proposed Tennessee Valley Authority acquisition zone, though the reservoir that would eventually flood parts of the area was still years away. What the investigators found in Ballplay Creek has never been made public, but the records exist. The following account is based on Monroe County Sheriff's Office reports, Tennessee Valley Authority land acquisition files, and interviews with 3 former residents who agreed to speak on condition of anonymity. The first indication that something was wrong in Ballplay Creek came from a traveling preacher named Orrin Bemis, who visited the valley on Sunday, October 16, 1938, to preach at the Ballplay Creek Primitive Baptist Church. Bemis arrived to find the church empty. This was unusual. The Ballplay congregation was devout and regular. Sunday services were the center of community life. Bemis waited for half an hour, then walked to the nearest farmhouse, the Paris family, a quarter-mile down the creek. He found the Paris family at home, but not preparing for church. Mrs. Paris, according to Bemis's later statement to the sheriff, seemed nervous and distracted. She told Bemis that the congregation had decided to suspend services for a time. When Bemis asked why, she would not answer directly. She said only that people have been seeing things in the woods at night, and that the old ones were right about this place. Bemis left the valley and reported the conversation to a friend in Vonore, who dismissed it as mountain superstition. But on October 22nd, a farmer named Arthur Killian drove to the Monroe County Sheriff's Office in Madisonville and reported that his brother's family, who lived on Ballplay Creek, had not been seen in 3 days. Killian had driven to the valley to check on them and found the house empty, the door open, food still on the table. Deputy Ellis Rector, now 71 and living in Sweetwater, agreed to be interviewed for this article. He was the officer who responded to Killian's report. I drove out there on October 23rd. It was a pretty fall day, leaves turning, nothing looked wrong from the road. But when I got down into the valley, something felt off. I couldn't place it at the time. Later I realized what it was. The place was too quiet. No dogs barking, no chickens in the yards, no smoke from the chimneys, a whole valley of farms and nobody moving. I checked the Killian place first. The house was just like Arthur said, door open, food on the table, a pot of beans gone bad on the stove. The beds were unmade, clothes were in the drawers. It looked like somebody had gotten up in the middle of a meal and walked out. I checked the next house and the next. Same thing everywhere. People gone, belongings left, no signs of struggle, no signs of a hurry, no knocked over chairs, no scattered possessions, just people not there anymore. Deputy Rector returned to Ballplay Creek on October 24th with Sheriff Wade Henry and 2 additional deputies. Over the course of 3 days, they conducted a house-by-house search of the entire valley. What they documented in their reports, which this newspaper has reviewed at the Monroe County Courthouse, was a pattern that defied easy explanation. In 18 of the 23 houses, the front doors were found unlocked or standing open. In all but 2, the family's shoes were still lined up by the door. In every house, the beds had been slept in and not remade. In 14 houses, uneaten or partially eaten meals were still on the table. No human remains were found. No blood was found. No signs of violence. No evidence of a struggle in any structure. In the woods behind the church, deputies found a patch of ground where the understory had been flattened in a rough circle approximately 20 feet across. The leaves and brush were pressed down, not broken, as if a heavy weight had been laid across them. In the center of the circle, the deputies found a single object, a woven Cherokee-style basket, old and weathered, containing a handful of dried corn, a small carved figure of a cat-like animal standing on its hind legs, and a lock of human hair tied with a strip of leather. Sheriff Henry, in his report, described the basket as old but deliberately placed. He noted that no fingerprints were found on it and that no resident interviewed prior to their departure mentioned this object to anyone in the community. The basket and its contents were collected as evidence. They are still in the possession of the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. The carved figure, roughly 4 inches tall, made of dark, smooth wood, depicts a feline creature with elongated limbs standing upright. The carving is not signed. Its origin has never been determined. One resident had not fled Ballplay Creek. His name was Hoyt Crisp, 53, who operated the general store at the crossroads. Crisp had no family and lived in a room behind the store. He was the sole person the deputies found still in the valley. Deputy Rector described Crisp in his report. Crisp was sitting on the porch of the store when we arrived. He appeared calm but tired. He said he had not slept much in the previous week. He said he had stayed because someone needed to keep the store open, and because he did not believe the thing in the woods would come into a building with electric lights. He had kept his lights on all night every night since October 15th. Crisp provided the deputies with a handwritten ledger in which he had recorded, in brief entries, the events of the preceding week. The ledger, entered into evidence as Crisp Account Book, contains the following sequence. October 14th. The sound started tonight. Heard it from up the creek. Like a woman crying, but it goes on too long. The dogs are all under the porches. October 15th. Sound again, closer. Marley's boy says he saw something walking on 2 legs up at the old ball ground. Says it was tall and dark and had a cat's head. Marley came in and bought 10 pounds of salt. Said they were putting a line around the house. Don't know what salt is supposed to do. October 16th. Nobody came in today. Church was empty. Preacher Bemis was here asking questions. I told him I didn't know anything. October 17th. Sound was right outside town last night. Heard it from the creek crossing. Something was moving around. Couldn't see it. Lights stayed on. October 18th. The Pruitts left this morning. Saw them going up the road in the wagon. Didn't stop. All their animals still in the pen. October 19th. 4 more families gone. Didn't see them leave. Their doors are open. October 20th. The crying sound is closer every night. Last night it was behind the store, but so I heard breathing outside the back door. I heard something scratch on the wall. It scratched 3 times and then stopped. I sat up with the shotgun. Nothing came in. October 21st. Nobody left in the valley now except me and the Killians, and the Killians say they're leaving tomorrow. I told them I'd keep the store. Somebody has to. The sound is not just crying now. It's saying words. I can't make out the words. It sounds like the old language. I don't speak it. I don't know what it wants. October 22nd. Killian's left. I'm the only one. I'm sitting in the store with the lights on. The sound is in the woods across the road right now. It's been there for an hour. I can hear it breathing. It knows I'm in here. It's waiting for the lights to go out. Hoyt Crisp's ledger ends with that entry. When deputies found him on October 24th, he told them the sound had stopped the night before. He had not heard it since. But he could not account for why it had stopped, or where the thing that made it had gone. In November 1938, the Tennessee Valley Authority became involved in the Ballplay Creek matter. The valley lay within a proposed acquisition zone for the Tellico Dam project, and the agency had a legal interest in the status of the properties. A Tennessee Valley Authority land agent named Harold Finch was assigned to assess the abandoned farms. He spent 3 days in Ballplay Creek in late November 1938, accompanied by a Monroe County deputy. Finch's report which survives in Tennessee Valley Authority archives, is primarily concerned with property valuations. But a supplementary memo marked Confidential Cultural Resources contains observations that depart from standard land assessment practice. The abandonment of this valley presents an unusual circumstance for valuation purposes. The structures are intact, the land is arable, and the improvements are of standard quality for the region. However, interviews with residents of adjacent valleys indicate that the abandonment was prompted by something other than economic factors. Several interviewees use terms such as the Watcher and the Crying One to describe what prompted the exodus. One interviewee, a Cherokee man from the nearby community, stated that the Ballplay Creek Valley was a place of punishment in the old traditions, and that the one who walks the boundary had returned to reclaim it. While I do not lend credence to such reports, the fact remains that this valley is functionally uninhabitable at present, as no one from the surrounding area will enter it after dark, and few will enter it during daylight hours. This should be factored into the valuation at a significant discount. Tennessee Valley Authority never publicly acknowledged Finch's memo. The land was acquired at a reduced rate. The reservoir that eventually flooded parts of the valley was completed in the 1940s. Other sections of Ballplay Creek remain above water, forested, and uninhabited. The Cherokee community near Ballplay Creek had its own name for what drove the settlers out. In interviews conducted for this article, several elders described a tradition associated with the old ball ground, the stickball field that had given the creek its name. A Cherokee woman, 74, who lives near Vonore and who agreed to speak anonymously, explained, "The ball ground was a sacred place. It wasn't just for games. It was where disputes were settled, where the peace was kept between towns. The old people said the ground had a guardian, a spirit that watched over the boundary between the ball ground and the outside world. If someone broke the peace of the ball ground, the guardian would appear. It would walk the boundary on two legs in the shape of a great cat. It would cry like a woman mourning. If you heard it crying, you knew you had done something wrong. You knew you had crossed a line." When asked why the guardian would return in 1938, long after the Cherokee had been removed, she said, "The boundary doesn't move. The ground remembers. The old people put things in the ground, prayers, protections, warnings. Those things don't go away. If someone disturbs them, the guardian wakes up. Something woke it up in 1938. I don't know what. But it walked again. And when it walks, people leave. That's what it's for." Ballplay Creek is now a ghost valley. The reservoir covers some of the lower bottomland. The remaining farms, still standing in 1947, are slowly collapsing into the undergrowth. The church roof caved in 3 years ago. The general store burned in an unexplained fire in 1941. The United States Forest Service does not encourage recreation in the area. A ranger contacted for this article said the agency does not maintain facilities in the Ballplay Creek drainage due to limited access and low demand. But people who live in the surrounding hills still talk about the valley. They talk about it at night in low voices when the wind is blowing from the south and carrying the sound of the lake water against the shore. They talk about what happened to the community that disappeared in a single week. They talk about the crying that was heard. They talk about the thing that walked on two legs with the head of a cat. Some of them call it the wampus cat. Some call it the Watcher. Some call it nothing at all. They simply don't go to Ballplay Creek after sundown, and they don't like to talk about why. The carved figure from the basket is still in the evidence room at the Monroe County Courthouse. The clerk who showed it to this reporter would not touch it. She said she did not like the way it felt. "It's just wood," she said. "But it's old wood, and it's been places. I put it back in the box when I'm done. Every time." What happened at the Crockett Farm, Hazel Fork, Kentucky? In the spring of 1954, a tobacco farmer named Arnold Crockett walked out of his kitchen door and was never seen again. Within 72 hours, his wife Loretta and their grown son, Wallace, had also disappeared from the family's 36-acre farm in eastern Letcher County. By the time the sheriff's office organized a formal search, there was nothing left to find except a single boot, with the foot still inside, and a neighbor's account that deputies never made public. For this retrospective, I interviewed retired Chief Deputy Clyde Henshaw, now 81, who served as the lead investigator on the Crockett case. It is the first time he has spoken on the record about what he saw during those 3 days in April 1954. The Crockett place sat at the dead end of a narrow gravel road called Hazel Fork. This 2 miles past the last maintained property line. Arnold Crockett grew burley tobacco and kept a small herd of beef cattle. He was known as a serious, church-going man. Loretta Crockett taught Sunday school at the Free Will Baptist Church in town. Wallace, 24, helped run the farm and had been courting a girl in Whitesburg. The family had no known enemies, no debts beyond the normal, and no history of unusual behavior. The night of April 2nd, their nearest neighbor, a woman named Ada Combs, telephoned the sheriff's office to report that the Crockett's cattle had been crying all evening, a sound she could not describe further but found so disturbing she refused to walk to her own barn after dark. She said it wasn't the cattle sounding hurt, Henshaw told me. It was the cattle sounding scared. She said she'd lived near livestock her whole life and she'd never heard an animal make a noise like that. On the morning of April 3rd, Arnold Crockett rose before dawn to check on the cattle. His wife told a relative later that he'd been worried about deer getting into the lower pasture. What troubled him, she said, was not the deer themselves, but the way they acted. He told her the deer didn't run when he came outside, Henshaw recalled, reading from his own yellowed notes. He said they just stood at the fence line and watched him. He said they were standing funny, like they were trying to be people. Those were his words. Arnold Crockett told his wife the deer were standing up on their hind legs, and there were 12 of them, all in a row, all facing the house. Loretta Crockett told her husband to stay inside. He said he was going to drive them off. He put on his work boots, picked up a walking stick, and walked out the kitchen door. He never came back. Wallace Crockett found his father's walking stick lying in the middle of the lower pasture around mid-morning. There was no other sign of him. That evening, Wallace Crockett drove into town and telephoned the sheriff's office from a gas station. Deputy Henshaw took the call. He agreed to drive out the following morning. When Henshaw arrived at 8:30 a.m. on April 4th, the farmhouse was empty. The kitchen door stood open. Breakfast dishes sat on the table, half eaten. Loretta Crockett's pocketbook and Wallace's truck keys were on the counter. The family dog, a black and tan hound, was found whimpering beneath the porch with its tail tucked so tightly it could not be coaxed out. In the barn, Henshaw discovered the boot. It was Wallace's boot, he said, still laced. The foot was inside, severed clean above the ankle. There was no blood on the ground. None on the bootlace. The flesh at the cut surface looked like it had been sealed. Not cauterized, not stitched, just closed. The coroner later said under a microscope the cells looked like they'd simply parted company with the rest of the leg. No tool marks, no tearing. No other remains of Wallace Crockett or any member of the family were ever recovered. Henshaw interviewed Ada Combs on the afternoon of April 4th. She lived a quarter mile up the hollow with a clear view of the Crockett's lower pasture and the tree line beyond. She had not slept the night before. Her statement, recorded in Henshaw's notebook and preserved in the case file, reads as follows. I was watching out my bedroom window after dark. I could still hear them cows carrying on. About 10 o'clock, I saw something moving at the edge of the woods. At first, I thought it was the Crockett men out with lanterns, but the shapes were too tall and they weren't carrying any light. Then they stepped into the open, and I saw they were deer. They walked on their hind legs like men. They went straight across the pasture and into the Crockett's barn. I counted 14 of them. They didn't hurry. They didn't make a sound. The cattle stopped crying the minute the last one went through the barn door. Henshaw asked her what happened next. Nothing, she said. Nothing happened. The barn stayed dark. The deer never came out. I stayed awake until sunrise. The barn doors were still open, but there wasn't anything inside except Wallace's cattle, all of them lying down with their faces pressed to the dirt. The sheriff's office conducted a 12-day search of the property and the surrounding ridges. Deputies found no tracks leading to or from the barn except those of the Crockett's own cattle and a confused overlay of deer prints. some of which, Henshaw noted, appeared unusually deep for their size and not arranged in any pattern that made sense for a four-footed animal. A state wildlife biologist examined the tracks and issued a brief report stating that the impressions were morphologically consistent with Odocoileus virginianus, the white-tailed deer, but that he could not account for the stride pattern or the depth of the impressions in dry April soil. The report was filed without comment. No official determination was ever made about the foot in the boot. The coroner listed Wallace Crockett's cause of death as undetermined and recommended the case remain open. Arnold and Loretta Crockett were declared legally dead in 1961. The Crockett farm has never been sold or occupied. The bank that held the mortgage abandoned the property after 2 unsuccessful attempts to auction it. The gravel road to Hazel Fork was never extended, and the county stopped grading it in 1963. The fence posts have rotted, but a few still stand along the lower pasture. Locals avoid the hollow. A survey crew that attempted to mark the property line in 1972 reported seeing a herd of deer at the edge of the woods that rose onto their hind legs and stood motionless, watching for over an hour before retreating into the trees. The crew left without finishing the job. A new crew was never dispatched. The case file for the Crockett disappearance was stored in the Letcher County Courthouse until a fire in 1977 destroyed the records room. What survives is in the private notes of retired officers and the memories of people like Clyde Henshaw. Before I left his home, Henshaw retrieved a small cardboard box from his closet. Inside was a single plaster cast of a deer track, taken from the Crockett pasture on April 5th, 1954. He handed it to me without a word. The track is ordinary in shape, a clean, cloven impression, but it is deeper than any deer track I have ever seen, as though the animal that made it carried far more weight than its frame should allow. Around the edges of the cast, faint lines are visible in the plaster, radiating outward in an even pattern that, under a magnifying glass, looks disturbingly like the grain of human hair. I asked Henshaw what he believed. He took the cast back and set it on the table. "I believe Arnold Crockett told his wife the truth about what he saw at his fence line," he said. "And I believe Ada Combs saw exactly what she said she saw. I don't know what came out of those woods in April of 1954, but I know it wore the shape of something we thought we understood, and I know there's been nobody living in Hazel Fork since." He paused. "That's enough for me. The Blue Branch disaster and the thing over Terminus Hollow Terminus, Kentucky." In the early evening of Monday, October 15th, 1951, the men of the Blue Branch No. 4 mine, a deep shaft operation owned by the Harlan Ridge Coal Company, were finishing the day's shift 800 feet below the surface of Letcher County. At 5:33 p.m., a methane gas explosion ripped through the main tunnel, killing all 38 men inside. The Bureau of Mines investigation, conducted over the following 6 months, produced 1,200 pages of testimony, diagrams, and reports. It concluded that a spark from a cutting machine had ignited an accumulation of methane near the working face. Safety violations were identified, fines were assessed, new ventilation regulations were drafted. The mining community of Terminus buried its dead and slowly continued living. But the investigation also collected something else, something the Bureau did not include in its published report. Buried in the hearing transcripts marked as Exhibit D, witness statements, unrelated incidents, are the sworn accounts of 12 residents of Terminus Hollow, who, in the 2 days before the explosion, reported seeing something flying over the town that they could not explain. These statements were not classified. They were not suppressed. They were simply ignored, set aside as irrelevant to the cause of the explosion, dismissed as the superstitions of a coal camp community under stress. For 7 years, no one has revisited them. This reporter has. The following account is based on the complete Bureau of Mines hearing record, interviews with surviving family members, the private papers of the late Dr. Silas T. Cornett, the Letcher County coroner who examined the bodies of the Blue Branch dead, and the testimony of one witness who has agreed to speak on the record for the first time. The sightings began on Saturday, October 13th, 1951, 2 days before the explosion. The first report came from a group of children playing in the schoolyard of the Terminus Consolidated Elementary School in the late afternoon. They were not interviewed by the Bureau. But 3 parents later mentioned the children's accounts in their own testimony, and these mentions were preserved. Mrs. Edna Whitlow, 34, wife of a miner who would die in the blast, told Bureau investigators, "My boy Eugene came home Saturday evening and said he and the other children saw a great big bird fly over the mountain. I said, 'How big?' He held his arms out as wide as he could. He said, 'Bigger than that, Mama.' It had a man's shape. It was dark and it didn't flap its wings. It just went over and down into the hollow and we couldn't see it after." Eugene is not a boy who tells stories. I didn't know what to make of it. That same evening, 3 men walking home from a shift at the Blue Branch No. 3 mine, a separate operation up the hollow, reported seeing a large dark shape cross the face of the rising moon. One of the men, Vernon D. Sizemore, gave a sworn statement on October 23rd during the Bureau's community hearings. We were walking the tram road about 7 o'clock. The moon was up over Black Mountain. Something passed in front of it. It wasn't a cloud. It was solid. It had a shape like a man, but it was flying. It had these big wings, like a bat's wing, but the body was thick, like a man's body. It didn't make any noise. I've lived in these mountains all my life. I've seen eagles. I've seen buzzards. This was not a bird. It went over the ridge toward No. 4. Sizemore was asked by the hearing examiner if he had been drinking. He replied that he was a deacon at the Terminus Free Will Baptist Church and had not touched alcohol in 14 years. On Sunday, October 14th, the sightings intensified. At approximately 11 o'clock a.m., the congregation of the Terminus Free Will Baptist Church, roughly 60 people, was in the middle of the morning service when something passed low over the church roof. The sound was described by multiple witnesses as a heavy rushing, like a wind that wasn't wind. Reverend Claude Tolliver, 61, the pastor, stepped outside and looked up. His statement, read into the hearing record on October 24th, was brief but precise. "I saw a large creature flying east, away from the church. It was shaped like a man but had wings. The wings were massive. I would estimate 15 feet from tip to tip. The color was a dark gray-brown. It was higher than the steeple at that moment and climbing. It made no vocal sound. I watched it until it disappeared over the ridge in the direction of the Blue Branch workings. I cannot account for what I saw in natural terms. I am a minister of the gospel. I do not traffic in falsehoods." At least 20 other congregants corroborated the sighting in individual interviews. Their descriptions were consistent. A man-shaped figure with enormous bat-like wings, dark in color, completely silent except for the sound of air displacement. That afternoon, a miner named Orrin C. Cricket Halcombe, who had the next day off and was sitting on his front porch, saw the figure fly directly over the hollow at an altitude he estimated at no more than 200 feet. His statement, "It blocked out the sun for a second. I saw the shadow come over the yard. I looked up. I saw the underside of it. It had a man's chest, man's arms. The legs were short compared to the body. The wings were long and pointed at the tips. It wasn't flapping. It was gliding like it was looking down at the houses. I thought about getting my rifle. I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I was too surprised. I never saw anything like it before or since." Halcombe's brother, Elmer, died in the explosion the following day. Monday, October 15th, 1951 was the day of the blast. The day shift entered Blue Branch No. 4 at 6 o'clock a.m. 38 men descended into the shaft. At approximately 4:30 that afternoon, a final sighting occurred. This witness, Mrs. Ada Cornett, 47, was the wife of the camp doctor who also served as county coroner. She was hanging laundry in her yard when she saw the figure fly directly over the Blue Branch tipple, the surface structure above the mine entrance, and then descend into the trees on the ridge above. She reported the sighting to her husband at dinner. Dr. Cornett recorded it in his private diary, which this reporter was permitted to examine. Ada says the flying thing came back this afternoon. It flew right over the mine mouth and went into the woods above the workings. She says it was lower than before, close enough that she could see details. It was looking down at the ground, she said. Its head moved like a man's head, scanning. She felt it was searching for something. She cannot explain why she felt that. She says the feeling was strong, like it knew something, like it was waiting. At 5:33 p.m., the explosion occurred. Rescue teams reached the underground workings shortly before midnight. There were no survivors. The bodies of the 38 miners were recovered over the following 3 days. The cause of death in every case was officially recorded as massive trauma and thermal injury consistent with methane explosion. But Dr. Cornett, who performed or supervised all 38 autopsies, noted something in his diary that he did not include in the official coroner's reports. On October 18th, he wrote, "There is a uniformity to the facial expressions of these men that I find troubling. I have examined victims of mine explosions before. The faces are usually contorted with pain, surprise, or if death was instantaneous, relatively blank. These men all bear the same expression, all bear mouth open, eyes wide, brows drawn together. It is not pain, it is not surprise. It is, if I must name it, a look of extreme, active terror, as if they saw something in the instant before the blast that horrified them more than the fire itself. I have no explanation for this. I will not record it officially. It is not a medical finding. It is an observation, but I have noted it for my own records." In addition, Dr. Cornett observed a substance on the clothing and exposed skin of several of the victims that he could not identify. He described it as a fine, pale gray powder, not coal dust, not rock dust, not ash. The powder was present in small quantities on the faces, hands, and front of the clothing of approximately half the deceased. It was not associated with any particular location in the mine. It did not correspond to any material used in the mining process. Dr. Cornett collected a sample and sent it to a laboratory in Lexington for analysis. The laboratory report, dated November 3rd, 1951, reads in its entirety, "Sample submitted, gray particulate unknown origin, composition organic, protein-based, contains trace calcium and keratin-like structures, does not match any industrial compound in our reference database, source indeterminate." Dr. Cornett wrote in his diary, "Keratin, the substance of hair, nails, feathers, scales. I do not know what this means. I do not want to know." The powder sample was destroyed in a laboratory fire in 1953, along with most of the facility's retained specimens. No photographs of the sample survive. The laboratory report remains in Dr. Cornett's papers. The Bureau of Mines conducted public hearings in Terminus from October 22nd through November 7th, 1951. Witness statements regarding the flying figure were accepted, transcribed, and placed into the record. The hearing examiner, a bureau engineer named Lester M. Groff, explicitly stated that these statements were being taken for completeness and would not form part of the official determination of cause. The published bureau report issued in April 1952 makes no reference to any of the sightings, but the transcripts exist, and they reveal a community that, independently and without prior consultation, described the same impossible thing: a winged, man-shaped creature flying over the hollow in the hours and days before the Blue Branch number 4 line exploded. Bureau Examiner Groff, now retired and living in Pennsylvania, was contacted by telephone for this article. He declined to discuss the Terminus hearings in detail, but offered a brief comment. "I recall the statements. I didn't know what to do with them. They weren't relevant to the cause of the explosion, and I didn't want to give them any official standing. I thought they'd just stir people up. I still think that was the right call. What happened in that mine was a gas explosion. The rest is, I don't know what the rest is." The Blue Branch number 4 mine never reopened. The company sealed the entrance in 1952. The tipple was dismantled and sold for scrap. The tram road has grown over with locust and sumac. The ridge above the mine mouth, where Ada Cornett saw the figure descend, is avoided by local hunters. No formal prohibition exists. It is simply not a place anyone chooses to go. The Terminus Free Will Baptist Church, where 60 people looked up and saw a flying thing cross the morning sky, remains an active congregation. Reverend Tolliver died in 1956. His successor, Reverend Delmas Price, declined to speak for this article, but offered a written statement. "The people of this church remember what happened in 1951. They do not talk about it with outsiders. They believe it was a sign. They do not agree on what kind of sign or what it meant, but they know it was real. Several still living saw it with their own eyes." A memorial service for the 38 dead miners is held annually on October 15th at the church. It is well attended. The names of the dead are read aloud. The congregation sings, "Abide with me." No mention is made of the flying thing. But at the dinner that follows the service, held in the church basement, the older members sometimes recount the events of October 1951 to the younger generation. The story is told quietly, in fragments. It has become part of the local memory, an unexplained antecedent to a tragedy, a detail that does not fit the official record, but that no one who was there can forget. A miner's widow, now 61 and living in Cumberland, agreed to speak anonymously. "My husband died in that hole. The government said it was gas. Maybe it was. But they didn't see what we saw. A thing like a man with wings flying over the tipple the afternoon of the blast. Flying low, like it was looking for something. Or waiting. I don't know which is worse." The Blue Branch incident leaves behind a stark evidentiary record. 38 dead miners, an explosion with a clear physical cause, and a community of witnesses who reported a winged humanoid figure in the sky for 2 days before the disaster, culminating in a final sighting less than an hour before the blast. The official investigation resolved the proximate cause. It could not resolve the testimonial anomaly. The Bureau of Mines is not equipped to explain flying creatures. It is equipped to explain gas ignition. It did its job. But the people of Terminus Hollow were left with a different kind of knowledge. The knowledge that something was present in their sky before their men died, something they saw clearly and described consistently and could not name. Dr. Cornett died in 1957. His diary concludes with an entry dated January 1st, 1955, that may stand as the final word on the matter. 3 years have passed since the Blue Branch explosion. I still have the laboratory report. I still see those men's faces. I do not know if the flying thing caused the blast. That seems impossible. But I cannot shake the conviction that it knew. It was here before. It was here when. It has not been seen since. I am a rational man. I am a physician. I will not write down what I truly believe. I will only say that there are patterns in this world that we do not understand, patterns that precede disaster, patterns that take forms we are not meant to recognize. Whatever flew over Terminus Hollow in October of 1951 was not an omen. An omen is a symbol. This was a presence. It was here for the same reason the men were. It was part of what happened. I cannot explain further. Incident at Lost Creek School. When the Wainwright County Board of Education voted to close Lost Creek School on May 17, 1954, the official explanation was declining enrollment. 11 students remained on the roster, down from 42 in 1939. The board cited the cost of maintaining a remote 2-room schoolhouse accessible only by a gravel road that washed out every spring. The vote was unanimous. The building would be shuttered, the students absorbed into the consolidated school in town. It was, by all appearances, a routine administrative decision in an era when dozens of mountain schools were closing across the region. But the people of Lost Creek knew better. For 11 years, they had been sending their children to a school where something was wrong. Not wrong in any way they could articulate to the county superintendent or the Board of Education or the reporters who occasionally drifted through asking questions. Wrong in a quieter, deeper way. Wrong in the way the children behaved when they came home. Wrong in the things they said and the things they would not say. Wrong in the drawings they brought back, the songs they hummed, the games they played in the yard after supper, games nobody had taught them. The official records of Lost Creek School from 1943 to 1954 remain sealed by order of the Wainwright County Board of Education, citing student privacy concerns. But this magazine has obtained a cache of documents, teacher reports, attendance logs, health inspection records, and personal correspondence that paint a picture of a school under a quiet, prolonged siege, and of the people in the woods who seem to be conducting it. What follows is the first complete account of the Lost Creek School incident ever assembled. Lost Creek School stood in a narrow valley in the northwestern corner of Wainwright County, a region of steep ridges, deep hollows, and sparse population. The nearest paved road was 9 miles away. The nearest neighbor was a tobacco farm 2 miles down the valley, owned by the Whitfield family. Beyond that, the valley was timber and rock and creek, unbroken wilderness stretching north into the Monongahela National Forest. The schoolhouse itself was a modest structure. White clapboard, tin roof, 2 classrooms divided by a folding wooden partition, a potbelly stove in each room, outhouses in the rear, a hand pump for water. It served grades 1 through 8 with 2 teachers managing 4 grades apiece. The students came from perhaps a dozen families scattered through the valley and the surrounding ridges. Farming families mostly, with a few whose fathers worked the timber crews or the coal seams. By all accounts, Lost Creek School was an unremarkable rural institution until the autumn of 1943. The first incident occurred on October 7th, 1943, and was documented by the teacher of the lower grades, a Miss Evelyn Hartley, age 23, in her first year of teaching. Her handwritten report to the county superintendent, dated October 8th, reads, "At approximately 1:15 p.m. yesterday, during the afternoon recess, I observed 3 figures standing at the edge of the woods approximately 200 yards north of the school building. They were not walking or moving in any direction. They were simply standing, facing the school. I called to Mr. Tolliver, who agreed that they did not appear to be any of the students' family members. They were, he estimated, fully grown adults, though it was difficult to determine much else at that distance. I rang the bell to call the children in from recess, and by the time all students were accounted for, and I looked again, the figures had withdrawn into the tree line. I did not see them depart." Mr. Tolliver was Russell Tolliver, a 30-year veteran of the county school system, then teaching the upper grades at Lost Creek. His own report to the superintendent, filed separately and without coordination with Miss Hartley, contained an additional detail. One of the figures appeared to be carrying something. I could not determine what it was. It appeared to be a stick or staff of some kind, though it did not appear to be used for walking. The figure simply held it upright at its side. The superintendent, a man named Clarence Buford, responded with a brief note advising the teachers to keep the children inside during recess if they felt it necessary, and to report any further observations. He suggested the figures were likely hunters or foresters. Miss Hartley did not request further guidance, but she did begin keeping a private log separate from her official reports, in which she recorded observations she felt unable to include in formal correspondence. This log, obtained by Appalachian Mysteries Quarterly from Miss Hartley's surviving niece, covers the period from October 1943 through Miss Hartley's departure from the school in June 1947. The log is a thin composition book, its pages yellowed, its ink faded. The entries are brief, clinical, and increasingly unsettled. October 14th, 1943. Figures again at edge of woods. Same location. Same approximate number. 3, possibly 4. Did not approach. Did not respond when Mr. Tolliver shouted. Departed when recess ended. October 21st, 1943. 2 of the children, the Whitfield boy and the younger Mathers girl, reported seeing someone at their windows last night. Both families live on the north side of the valley, nearest the woods. The Whitfield boy said the person knocked on the glass like they were asking to come in, but they didn't say anything. The boy said his father went outside with a shotgun, but found nothing. I do not know what to tell these children. November 4th, 1943. The figures had begun appearing during morning recess as well, not only in the afternoon. Today they were closer, perhaps 150 yards. Mr. Tolliver telephoned the sheriff, who sent a deputy out this afternoon. The deputy walked the woods but found no tracks, no evidence of campfires or habitation. He suggested to us that the children might be imagining things. I did not tell him that I have seen the figures myself on 5 separate occasions now. I am not imagining them. November 18th, 1943. Something has changed in the children. I cannot name it. They are quieter than they were in September. They do not laugh as much. Their games have become strange. They form circles in the yard and stand perfectly still, facing outward, for minutes at a time. When I ask what they are doing, they say they are playing sentinel. I do not know where they learned this word. December 2nd, 1943, a child, the oldest Mathers girl, Agnes, age 12, asked me today whether I had ever heard them talking. I asked whom she meant. She said, The people in the trees. They talk at night. You can hear them if you open your window. They say the same thing over and over, but I can't understand the words. I asked if she had told her parents. She said yes, but her father told her it was just coyotes. She said coyotes don't sound like that. I believe her. The log continues in this vein for months. The figures at the tree line become a regular occurrence, never approaching, never communicating, never visible for more than a few minutes, but always present. Miss Hartley recorded 27 sightings between October 1943 and May 1944. Russell Tolliver, in a separate log, recorded 31. The figures were always adult in size, always standing motionless, always watching the school. What makes Miss Hartley's log genuinely disturbing, however, is not the sightings themselves. It is the entries concerning the children. January 19th, 1944. 3 of the younger girls drew pictures today during the art period. I collected them and did not return them. I do not know what to make of them. They all drew the same thing, a group of tall, thin people standing in a line, holding hands with what appear to be small shapes, children, standing in front of them. The drawings are not alarming in any obvious way, but the consistency is troubling. I asked the girls separately who the people in the drawings were. All 3 said, the teachers. When I asked what they meant, none of them could explain. I have not mentioned these drawings to Mr. Tolliver. March 3rd, 1944. The children have begun humming a tune. They do it during quiet work periods, almost unconsciously. It is the same tune, repeated over and over, a simple melody, perhaps 6 notes in a minor key. I do not recognize it. When I asked one of the boys where he learned it, he said he did not know. He said he had always known it. Another child told me, the people in the trees sing it at night. I have not heard any singing. April 14th, 1944. 2 boys, the Whitfield boy and his cousin, got into a fight during recess today. When I separated them and asked what had started it, the Whitfield boy said his cousin had told them our names. I asked who he meant by them. He pointed at the woods. He said his cousin had stood at the tree line and shouted their family names, Whitfield, Mathers, Pridemore, Tolliver, Hatfield, Green, into the trees. He said, now they know who we are. The cousin, a boy of 10, denied it, but I saw the look on his face. He had done it. I sent a note home with both boys. I do not know what else to do. September 1944, a new school year. The figures are still there. They do not come closer. They do not go away. I have stopped reporting them to the superintendent. He does not wish to hear about it. October 1944, the humming has spread. Every child in the lower grades now hums the same tune during quiet moments. When I mentioned it to Mr. Tolliver, he said he had noticed the same thing in the upper grades. He said he had asked the children to stop, and they did, but within minutes they would start again without seeming to notice. He said it was like a habit they can't break. I asked if he recognized the melody. He said no. He said he had tried to write it down to see if it matched any hymn or folk song he knew, but it did not. He said, it doesn't sound like anything that belongs to us. The most significant event documented in Miss Hartley's log occurred in March 1945, March 15th, 1945. Today, one of the first grade boys, the youngest Hatfield child, Thomas, did not come to school. His older sister, a 3rd grader, said he was sick. At recess, I noticed a group of children gathered near the woodpile, and when I approached, they scattered. Only the older Mathers girl remained. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as guilty. I asked what they had been doing. She said nothing. I asked again. She said they had been saying the names. I asked what she meant. She said, we say the names of all the children in the valley. When someone is sick, we say their name 3 times, and then they get better. I asked who had taught them this. She said no one taught them. She said, we just know. We've always known. I asked what names they say. She said, all of them. Even the ones who don't come here anymore. Even the ones from before. I asked what she meant by the ones from before. She said she didn't know. She said, they tell us the names. I asked who they are. She looked toward the woods and said nothing more. Miss Hartley reported this conversation to Russell Tolliver, who in turn contacted the families of all students enrolled at Lost Creek. What they discovered was that every child in the valley, not only those old enough to attend school, but children as young as 3, could recite the full names of every person under the age of 16 living within a 5-mile radius. More disturbingly, they could recite the names of children who had lived in the valley decades earlier, children whose names they could not possibly have known, including several who had died in a typhoid outbreak in 1917, 30 years before any of them were born. A mother of one family, a woman named Ada Pridemore, was the first to demand answers from her own children. Her account, recorded in a sworn affidavit given to the sheriff's office in 1946, and subsequently buried in county records until our recovery of it last year, reads as follows. I sat my two oldest down at the kitchen table and I said, "You tell me right now where you learned those names." And they looked at each other and they wouldn't say nothing. So I said, "If you don't tell me, I'm going to take a switch to both of you," which I never done before, and I felt sick for saying it, but I had to know. And my boy, he was 9. He started crying and he said, "Mama, the people in the woods tell us at night. They stand outside the window and they say the names, and we say them back. We can't help it. We have to say them back. If we don't say them back, they stay outside all night and they tap on the glass and they don't stop until we say the names." I asked him what people. He said, "The people who live in the ground, the hungry people. They want the names." I didn't sleep that night. I haven't slept right since. By the spring of 1946, the situation at Lost Creek had become impossible to ignore. Attendance had declined sharply, not because the children were sick, but because parents were keeping them home. Families began moving out of the valley. The Whitfields sold their farm in August 1946 and relocated to Ohio, leaving behind a house that stood empty for years. 2 other families followed within 6 months. The teachers' logs for the 1946-47 school year are sparse. Miss Hartley's entries become shorter, flatter, as though she had exhausted her capacity for concern. October 1946. 7 students present today. 11 on the roster. The figures are still at the tree line. Closer now, I think. Mr. Tolliver no longer reports them. I no longer record them. January 1947. The children no longer hum. They no longer draw pictures. They sit at their desks and they stare at the windows. They will not say what they are waiting for. March 1947. I have accepted a position at the consolidated school in town for the fall term. I have not told Mr. Tolliver. I do not think he will be surprised. Miss Hartley's last entry in the log is dated May 23, 1947, the final day of the school year. I will not return to Lost Creek. I have tried to write down everything I saw and heard here because I believe one day someone will want to know what happened. But I cannot explain it. The best I can say is this. There are people living in these mountains who are not like us. They have been here longer than we have. They do not think the way we think, and they do not want what we want. What they want, I do not know. But they wanted something from our children, and I am almost certain that they got it. I do not know what it was. I do not want to know. I am going to leave this valley, and I am never coming back. God forgive me. She never returned. Russell Tolliver continued teaching at Lost Creek School for another 7 years after Miss Hartley's departure, joined by a series of younger teachers who rarely stayed more than a single term. His own log from those years, obtained from his estate after his death in 1962, has been withheld from publication by his surviving family. A relative who agreed to speak to this magazine on condition of anonymity described the log as the record of a man watching something happen in slow motion and being powerless to stop it. By 1954, only 11 students remained. The Board of Education voted to close the school and the building was abandoned. For a decade, it stood empty, visited only occasionally by teenagers and curiosity seekers. In 1964, it burned under circumstances that were never investigated. The foundation stones remain visible today, though the forest has reclaimed much of the site. But the children who attended Lost Creek School between 1943 and 1954, the generation that grew up in the shadow of the figures at the tree line, that hummed the strange melodies, that recited the names of the dead at their bedroom windows, what became of them? This magazine tracked down 7 of them, now in their 30s and 40s, living in 3 different states. 5 refused to speak about their experiences at all. One, a woman now living in Cincinnati, agreed to a brief telephone interview, during which she said only, "I still know the names. I've tried to forget them, but I can't. Every person who ever lived in that valley, all the way back. I know them all. I don't know why. I don't want to know why. Please don't call me again." The 7th was a man named Arthur Tolliver, the youngest son of the teacher Russell Tolliver, who had attended the school for 2 years before it closed. He was located in a state hospital in Western Virginia, where he had been a patient since 1968. According to hospital records, he was admitted for a condition described as intractable insomnia with auditory hallucinations. In his admission interview, he told the attending physician that he could not sleep because every night, regardless of where he was, he heard voices outside his window reciting names, thousands of names, an endless litany of names, and that he was required to recite them back. "If I stop," he told the doctor, "they'll come inside." The doctor noted that the patient was unable to explain who they were. Arthur Tolliver died in the hospital in 1973. His death certificate lists the cause as exhaustion. The Lost Creek Valley remains sparsely populated. The farms that once lined the road are mostly gone. Collapsed barns, overgrown fields, the occasional chimney standing alone in the brush. The families that stayed longest, the Pridemores, the Mathers, a few others, have all left or died out. The valley is quiet now, visited mainly by hunters and the occasional hiker who has wandered off the marked trails of the National Forest, but not entirely quiet. In 1969, a survey team from the United States Geological Survey spent 3 days in the valley updating topographic maps. The team leader, a man named Gerald Colson, filed an unusual report with his superiors upon his return. He described hearing voices at night, multiple voices, coming from the woods north of the old school site. The voices were speaking in unison, he said, though he could not make out the words. It sounded like a litany or a chant, or perhaps a list being recited from memory. He also reported that the voices seemed to be speaking names. His superiors noted the report and filed it without action. The United States Geological Survey maps of the area were never updated. To this day, the Lost Creek Valley appears on official maps as it did in 1943, with a school that no longer exists, on a road that no longer appears on any highway index, in a valley that the map makers, it seems, prefer to leave alone. The ridge where hunters won't go, Bowden Hollow, West Virginia. If you ask anyone over 40 in this part of Hollow County where they won't set foot after the first week of November, the answer is always the same: Bowden Ridge. Not because the terrain is impassable, not because the timber is poor or the game is scarce. It is because of what happened to 4 men during the 1967 buck season and what the county medical examiner later wrote on a death certificate that still has no adequate explanation. This is the first time the complete record of that incident has been assembled for the public, drawn from state game commission reports, sheriff's department files, and interviews with the 2 surviving witnesses who agreed to speak on the record after 11 years. October 1967. The season opened cool and dry. By the second week, several hunters reported seeing deer that seemed wrong, but none of the early complaints rose to the level of an official report. Roy Hibbs, then a game warden assigned to District 3, told me he received 4 separate phone calls in 5 days from camps along Bowden Creek. One fellow said he'd watched a doe walk in a perfect circle for 11 minutes without stopping, Hibbs recalled. Another said a buck stood at the edge of his clearing and stared directly at his lantern for over an hour. It didn't blink, didn't lower its head. When the hunter shouted, the deer stood up on its hind legs and walked into the brush. He swore it took 5 steps upright before it dropped back down. Hibbs documented the calls but saw nothing himself. On the morning of November 6th, a party of 4 experienced hunters, Virgil Croy, Elmer Croy, Lester Treadway, and a younger man named Ray Sizemore, hiked onto the ridge from the old logging road above Big Clear Creek. They planned to be out 3 days. None of them came home. When the men failed to return by nightfall on November 9th, the sheriff's office organized a search party of 23 men. Virgil Croy's wife told deputies her husband had taken a Polaroid camera with him, something he rarely did, because he'd wanted to photograph a buck he'd seen the previous weekend that didn't move right. At 11:40 a.m. on November 10th, the search party found Ray Sizemore sitting against a chestnut oak near a dry creek bed. He was conscious but unable to speak coherently. His rifle was missing. His wool coat was torn across the back in 4 vertical lines that one deputy later described as the kind of rip a man might make trying to get out of something, not the kind an animal's claw would make. 3 hours later, they located the bodies of Virgil Croy, Elmer Croy, and Lester Treadway in a shallow draw less than 600 yards away. The scene, according to the sheriff's report, was orderly in a way that unsettled every man present. The 3 men were found lying on their backs, arms at their sides, no sign of a struggle. Their rifles were laid next to them, unbent but utterly useless. Each weapon had been discharged once, and the barrels were packed tightly with dried grass and crushed laurel leaves, as though something had methodically plugged them. The Polaroid camera was found near Virgil Croy's body. The film cartridge was missing. Dr. Clarence Harlow, then the county medical examiner, performed the autopsies at the old hospital in Beckley on November 11th. His findings were forwarded to the state medical examiner's office in Charleston and later entered as sealed exhibits in an insurance inquiry brought by the Croy family. What Dr. Harlow found, he later described in a letter to the state office as not consistent with any known predator in the central Appalachian region. All 3 men died from blunt force trauma, but the pattern of bruising on their torsos did not match the impact of a falling limb, a rock slide, or a bear's paw. The bruises were clustered in pairs, deeply discolored, each pair spaced roughly 4 inches apart. Their shapes, Harlow wrote, were consistent with the impression of a cloven hoof, a hoof striking downward. The autopsy diagrams, which this newspaper has reviewed, show the impact angles. The blows came from above, as though the men had been struck by something standing on its hind legs and lashing out with forelimbs that terminated in hooves, not claws. Dr. Harlow calculated that for the trauma to be delivered from that height, the animal would need to stand a minimum of 7 feet tall at the shoulder when upright. No animal in North America fits that description. Ray Sizemore was hospitalized for 11 days. The official interview, conducted by Sheriff Ernest Tiller on November 19th, lasted less than 30 minutes. A transcript was preserved in the case file, a copy of which was provided to this reporter by the Sheriff's Department under the state's public records law. Sizemore's statement was fragmentary, but consistent through multiple retellings. He said the party had been walking along a narrow hogback when Virgil Croy spotted a small herd of deer in a meadow below. There was 8 or 9 of them, Sizemore told the sheriff, but they were all standing up, not feeding, just standing on their back legs with their heads turned, looking at us. I've never seen deer stand like that. They look like people waiting for a bus, except their knees bent backwards. He said Virgil raised his Polaroid and took a photograph. The instant the shutter clicked, every deer in the meadow dropped to all 4s in perfect unison. Then, Sizemore said, they began to run. They didn't run away from us. They ran across the meadow and came straight up the slope. Animals were running at. I could hear their hooves hitting the rock. It sounded like somebody beating a rug. Virgil only had time to yell once before they were in the trees. I never saw them close. I only remember something tall and brown stepping out from behind a big oak, and then the whole world turned sideways. Sizemore had no memory of the attack itself. He recalled only waking up alone against the chestnut tree, his mouth full of dry leaves, the woods completely silent. Sheriff Tiller treated the case as a possible bear attack or a confrontation with a poacher, but the autopsy results forced him to widen the inquiry. A wildlife biologist from West Virginia University visited the scene on November 14th and took plaster casts of tracks. Some were ordinary deer tracks. Others, he noted in his report, were atypical. A set of prints led from the draw where the bodies were found to the edge of the meadow. For approximately 60 yards, the tracks showed a deer walking on its hind legs, the stride length indicating a bipedal gait. The impressions were deeper than they should have been, suggesting significant weight. The tracks stopped in the center of the meadow. There were no other prints leading away, no sign that the animal had changed direction or returned to four legs. The ground surrounding the final prints was undisturbed in every direction. "It's like the thing just lifted off," the biologist wrote in his field notes. He later declined to be interviewed for this article. In February 1968, the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources quietly closed Bowden Ridge to all hunting, trapping, and camping. The closure order cited ongoing investigation into unexplained wildlife behavior. It has never been rescinded. By 1970, local hunters had drawn their own conclusions. The name Not Deer Ridge began appearing in conversation, then on hand-drawn maps posted at the general store. A few families moved away from the hollows below the ridge. The Bowden Creek Church started holding its annual homecoming indoors rather than at the old pavilion on the Ridge Road. No public vote was taken, it just happened. Today, the ridge is quiet. The forest has reclaimed the old logging roads. But every November, a few older men still gather at the gas station on Route 19 and tell the story again, making sure the newcomers know exactly where not to go. Ray Sizemore died in 1974 of causes unrelated to the attack. He never hunted again. In his final interview given to a Charleston reporter 3 months before his death, he was asked if he believed the thing that killed his friends was still on the ridge. "I don't know what it was," he said, "but I know what it wasn't." He looked at the reporter and added, "It wasn't a deer." The disappearance of the Hobson family. Wise, Virginia. In the early winter of 1934, a family of 7 vanished from their farm on the north slope of Pine Mountain in Wise County, Virginia. Their house was found locked from the inside. Their possessions were undisturbed. A fire was still burning in the stove. They left behind their livestock, their clothing, and their family Bible, open to a page that had been carefully hollowed out as if by a knife, leaving nothing but a fragile lattice of paper. No trace of the Hobsons has ever been found. The Wise County Sheriff's Office investigated the disappearance for 3 months. The Virginia State Police were consulted. A geologist from the University of Virginia was called in to examine the land around the farm. The case was never solved, and the official file was closed in 1935 with the notation, "Disappearance, unexplained, presumed deceased, cause unknown." But the investigation uncovered evidence that was not included in the public report. Evidence that the sheriff at the time, Hardin B. Stidham, described in a private letter as the strangest thing I've ever encountered in 22 years of law enforcement. This article is based on the full sheriff's file, state police correspondence, the geologist's report, and interviews with the one surviving relative of the Hobson family who has agreed to speak. The Hobsons were not popular in the Pine Mountain community. They had lived on the mountain since the 1890s. Farming a narrow bench of land that overlooked the Pound River. They kept to themselves. They did not attend church. They did not trade at the local store if they could avoid it. The children, there were 5, did not attend the county school. By 1934, the household consisted of Emil Hobson, 58, the patriarch Della Hobson, 54, his wife Clabe Hobson, 31, their eldest son Ora Hobson, 27, their daughter-in-law, Clabe's wife, Easter Hobson, 22, their youngest daughter, Lillard Hobson, 6, Clabe and Ora's son Letty Hobson, 4, Clabe and Ora's daughter Hodder. The family subsisted on a small corn and tobacco patch, a few hogs, a milk cow, and what they could gather from the forest. They were known to be knowledgeable about herbs and wild plants. Della Hobson, in particular, was said to possess a gift for healing and for other things. A neighbor named Ambers Collins, interviewed by the sheriff in 1934, and later by this reporter, he is now 82 and living with his daughter in Norton, described the Hobsons in blunt terms. "People around here thought they were witches. I don't mean fairy tale witches. I mean the real thing. The kind that could make your cow go dry by looking at it, or give you a pain in your gut just by thinking about it." Della Hobson, she knew things. She knew when somebody was going to die. She knew when a baby was coming before the mother did. People went to her for help, same as they went to Granny Arbutus over in Buchanan, but they didn't like her. They were scared of her. The Hobsons, all of them, there was something about them that wasn't right. In the spring of 1933, A dispute arose between the Hobsons and a neighboring family named Stollard over the boundary line between their properties. The dispute grew heated. Words were exchanged. According to several witnesses, Emil Hobson told Leif Stollard, the neighbor, that "you'll wish you'd left that line alone." Within a month, the Stollard family's well water turned bitter. Their milk cow sickened and died, and their eldest son developed a skin condition that no doctor could diagnose. The Stollards did not file a complaint. They simply moved away, left the county entirely in the summer of 1933. Their farm was sold at a loss. The new owners, a family from Ohio, did not stay long either. They left in October, citing bad feelings in the house. By the winter of 1933, the Hobson family was more isolated than ever. On the morning of December 4th, 1934, a timber cruiser named Early Mullins walked past the Hobson farm on his way to survey a stand of hardwood on the upper mountain. He noticed that the gate was open and that no smoke was rising from the chimney. This was unusual. The Hobsons kept their gate latched, and December was cold. Mullins called out. No one answered. He walked to the house and found the front door locked. He looked through a window. The kitchen table was set for a meal. 7 plates, 7 cups, a pot of something that had frozen in the cold. The stove was still warm. The fire had burned down to coals but was not entirely out. The family's shoes were lined up by the door. Their coats hung on pegs. Mullins walked to the barn. The livestock were still in their stalls, the cow unmilked, the hogs unfed. The family dog, a black mongrel, was lying on the porch whining. Mullins told the sheriff later, "That dog wouldn't leave the porch, wouldn't come when I called, just lay there and whined, like it was waiting for something." Mullins walked back to the nearest neighbor, Ambers Collins, 2 miles down the mountain, and telephoned the Wise County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Hardin Stidham arrived on December 5th with 2 deputies. Their initial assumption was that the family had fled for some reason, perhaps a debt, a crime, a family emergency. But nothing in the house suggested a hurried departure. The doors were locked from the inside. The windows were latched. The family's money, a small tin box containing $47, was found under a loose floorboard. Their clothing was in the drawers. Their beds were unmade, as if they had been slept in the night before. The only unusual item in the house was the Bible. The Hobson family Bible was a large, heavy volume printed in 1872 that had been in the family for generations. It sat on a small table in the front room. The sheriff found it open to the book of Job, but the pages, both sides of the open spread, had been cut. Not torn, not ripped, but carefully excised with a sharp blade. The text had been removed, leaving only a delicate web of paper fibers where the words had been. The cut was precise, almost surgical. The pages beneath were untouched. Sheriff Stidham wrote in his report, "The Bible is altered in a manner that I cannot explain. The removed portion does not appear to have been taken for any practical purpose. The cut-out text is not a passage of particular significance that I can identify. The workmanship is extraordinary. No shavings or paper fragments were found in the house. I do not know how this was accomplished or why." The state police, called in on December 8th, conducted a thorough search of the property and surrounding forest. They found no footprints in the frozen ground leading away from the house, despite a dusting of snow that had fallen on the night of December 3rd, which would have preserved any tracks. The snow around the house was undisturbed in every direction. The only tracks were those of the family inside the house where the floors were bare wood. Those tracks led from the bedrooms to the kitchen, around the table, and stopped. There was no indication that anyone had walked toward a door or window. On December 12th, 1934, a search party of 15 men fanned out across the upper slopes of Pine Mountain above the Hobson farm. They were looking for any sign of the family, a campsite, a trail, a piece of clothing. What they found was a single object, lying in a small clearing in the deep woods, approximately 1.5 miles above the house. It was a child's shoe. The shoe was identified by Ambers Collins as belonging to Letty Hobson, the 4-year-old. It was a small brown leather boot, handmade, with a wooden button. It was not weathered. It had not been chewed by animals. It was sitting upright in the center of the clearing, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. And it was full of flowers. The flowers were fresh. Wild columbine, hepatica, and bloodroot, all species that bloom in the spring. It was December. The ground was frozen, the flowers were not withered, their stems were green, their petals were soft, they were growing through the leather of the shoe, their roots piercing the sole and extending into the soil beneath. The man who found the shoe, a deputy named Elmer Bowling, gave this testimony to the sheriff. "I saw the shoe from about 10 yards off. I thought it was just a shoe. When I got closer, I saw the flowers. I stopped. I didn't want to touch it. It was December. There's no flowers in December, not up here. But these were fresh. You could smell them. And the way they were growing, through the leather, like they'd been planted there and had time to root. I don't know how long that takes. I don't think it can happen in one night. I don't think it can happen at all." The shoe and the flowers were collected and brought down the mountain. By the time they reached the sheriff's office in Wise, the flowers had begun to wilt. Within a few hours, they had crumbled to a fine gray dust. The shoe remained. A botanist from the University of Virginia, Dr. Thurman K. Jessup, examined the remaining dust and the shoe on December 15th. His report, entered into the sheriff's file, is brief. The residual plant material is consistent with spring-blooming species native to this elevation, including Appalachia canadensis, wild columbine, and Sanguinaria canadensis, bloodroot. These species require soil temperatures above 50 degrees Fahrenheit for germination and growth, and do not bloom naturally before April at this latitude. I can offer no explanation for their presence in a child's shoe on a frozen mountain in December. The root penetration of the leather indicates a growth period of not less than 10 to 14 days. The shoe appears to have been outdoors for that period. How it arrived at the location and how the flowers grew in winter conditions, I cannot determine. The investigation took a turn in January 1935 when Sheriff Stidham interviewed an elderly Cherokee woman named Annie Otter, who lived near the town of Pound. Otter was a basket maker and a keeper of old stories. She had heard about the Hobson disappearance from a relative who worked at the courthouse. Sheriff Stidham's notes of the interview read, "She told me that the mountain where the Hobsons lived was known to the old people as a boundary place, a place where the world of the living and the world of the spirits touched. She said that people who lived in such places sometimes learned to cross the boundary or to call things across it. She said the old name for such people was the walkers between. She said they were not evil and not good, they were just between. She said that when such people left, they didn't always leave in the ordinary way. They might walk into the mountain and not come back. They might take their whole family with them. She said if the Hobsons had crossed, they would have left a sign behind, something blooming out of season, something growing where it shouldn't grow. She asked if we found any flowers. I told her about the shoe. She nodded and said, 'Then they're gone. They're not coming back. The mountain took them.'" Sheriff Stidham did not include the Annie Otter interview in his official report. It survives in his private papers, which his son provided to this newspaper. By March 1935, the active search for the Hobson family was abandoned. No further evidence was found. The house was left as it was, locked, furnished, waiting. The livestock were sold at auction. The land reverted to the county for unpaid taxes. In the years since, no one has lived on the Hobson farm. The house still stands, though the roof has partially collapsed. The barn has fallen in. The spring that supplied the family's water has gone dry, or so the neighbors say. The truth is that few people go up there to check. Ambers Collins, interviewed for this article, said that he had not been to the Hobson place since 1934. He did not intend to go again. "There's something wrong with that ground," he said. Before the Hobsons disappeared, it was just a farm. After, it was something else. The trees don't grow right up there. The deer don't go there. You can stand on the ridge and look down, and it looks like a farm, but it doesn't feel like a farm. It feels like something's waiting. Something that hasn't finished what it started. The shoe, the small brown boot with the wooden button, remains in the evidence locker at the Wise County Courthouse. The flowers are gone. The dust is gone. But the holes where the roots push through the leather are still visible, small and round and perfectly clean, as if they were made yesterday. A woman named Verlie Hobson, now 68 and living in a nursing home in Bristol, Tennessee, is the niece of Emil Hobson. She left the Pine Mountain community in 1930 at age 15 to marry a man from Tennessee. She is the only surviving relative who remembers the family. Contacted for this article, she agreed to speak briefly. My uncle Emil was a strange man. His wife Della was stranger. They had books. I don't know what kind of books, but my father said they were books that shouldn't have been in a Christian house. They knew things. They didn't go to church. They didn't want company. When I heard they'd vanished, I wasn't surprised. I was sad, but I wasn't surprised. My grandmother, who died before I was born, was said to have the old knowledge, the signs, the cures. She passed it to Della. Della passed it to Aura. I think they got in too deep. I think they crossed a line that wasn't meant to be crossed. And when the time came, the mountain took them back. The shoe with the flowers, that was the sign. That was them saying goodbye. They left the way they came. They left through the ground. She would say no more. The Pine Mountain community has dwindled. The Hobson Farm Road is overgrown and impassable by vehicle. The county assessor lists the property as unimproved mountain land, no structures of value. The house technically is still there. The local people do not speak of the Hobsons. When outsiders ask about the disappearance, they receive short answers. Old story. Nobody knows. Happened a long time ago. But the children of Pine Mountain are still warned not to wander onto the upper slopes after dark. They are told that the woods up there are thick and the footing is bad and there's nothing worth finding. They are not told about the woman who walked between, or the family that vanished on a December night, or the shoe full of flowers growing out of season. Some stories don't need to be told. The land remembers. The mountain remembers. And sometimes in early December, when the snow is fresh and the moon is bright, something blooms on the upper slope, a patch of wild columbine, red and yellow, pushing up through the frozen leaves. It blooms for one night, and then it's gone. No one goes up to see it. But they know. The winter, the old folks feared the open window. Cherokee, North Carolina. The road into Skull Camp Hollow isn't marked. It hasn't been maintained by the county since 1962. The families who still live there, some descended from the original settlers who arrived before the Civil War, call it by a different name now, one you won't find on any map. They call it Feather Holler. Ask why, and an old woman will tell you to come back at night on the 21st of December, when every house keeps its lights burning and no one sleeps. That's the long night, she'll say. We watch for the old ones. We've done it every year since the winter of 59 and 60, and not a grandparent has died in this hollow on that night since. What happened in Skull Camp Hollow between December 1959 and March 1960 is documented in a slim but disturbing case file kept by the Swain County Sheriff's Office, supplemented by the private papers of the late Dr. Samuel Tuttle, the county coroner who refused to accept the easy explanation. This article is drawn from those records and from interviews with 6 surviving witnesses who agreed to speak for the first time. On the morning of December 8th, 1959, Bess Partridge walked into her father's room to wake him for breakfast. Amos Partridge was 81 years old, frail from a winter cough, but still sharp. He had been in good spirits the night before. When Bess opened the door, she found him dead, lying on his back with his hands folded across his chest, as though he had been laid out. The window was wide open, and the room was freezing. A dusting of snow had settled on the sill, but there were no tracks outside the house. Papa always slept with the window cracked, Bess Partridge told Deputy Ronald Crow, who responded to the call. But he never opened it all the way. He couldn't hardly lift the sash no more. On the pillow next to Amos Partridge's head, she found a single black feather. It was 8 inches long and slightly curved, with an iridescent sheen that shifted from green to deep violet when held to the light. She kept it. She still has it today. Dr. Samuel Tuttle had been the coroner for Swain County since 1947. He was a careful man, a graduate of the medical college in Richmond, and he kept meticulous notes. When he examined Amos Partridge's body, he noted no signs of struggle, no petechiae, no evidence of a heart attack or stroke. He listed the cause of death as cardiopulmonary failure, undetermined. He might have left it there had the second call not come 6 days later. On December 14th, Edna Crow, age 79, was found dead in her home on the same stretch of Hollow Road. The window beside her bed was thrown open to the bitter night. A neighbor who had been sitting with her until 10 o'clock reported hearing nothing. But the neighbor's son, a boy of 13, said he'd woken around midnight to what he described as a sound like somebody beating a heavy rug, but softer, like wings. He looked out his window and saw a shape rising above the roofline of the Crow house, dark against the clouds before it disappeared into the forest. No one took the boy's statement seriously. Edna Crow's daughter found a feather on the bed. It matched the one Bess Partridge had shown the deputy the week before. By January 1st, 2 more elderly residents had died under nearly identical circumstances: Lyman Tisateski, age 76, and Ruthie Walkingstick, age 82. In each case, the window was open, the body was arranged with its arms at its sides, and a single black feather was found in the bedding. Dr. Tuttle asked Sheriff Clyde Mincy to open a formal inquiry. "I can't give you a cause of death that makes sense," he wrote in a letter to the state medical examiner's office, "but I can tell you this isn't natural. 4 people in one hollow, all elderly, all in the same month, all with that same open window and that same feather. I'd rather be called a fool than ignore it." By the 3rd week of January, the families of Skull Camp Hollow had begun their own response. They organized a rotating watch. Every house with an elderly parent or grandparent posted 2 adults awake through the night. Doors were locked, windows were nailed shut. A local preacher held a prayer meeting at the small Baptist church and told the congregation that something wicked has set its eye on this valley. It didn't help. On the night of January 28th, 3 men stood watch in the home of Clay Sequoia, age 88, a widower living alone near the head of the hollow. The men included Clay's nephew, Harlan Sequoia, and 2 neighbors, Emmett and John LaSaya. They had been sitting in the front room since 10 p.m., playing cards by lantern light, checking the bedroom every 15 minutes. At 2:30 a.m., Harlan Sequoia heard a sound like a strong gust of wind, but only directly outside the bedroom window, nowhere else. He stepped into the bedroom and saw the window was still nailed shut, but the glass was fogged from the outside. Pressed into the condensation, he said, was the outline of a hand, but the fingers were too long, and they bent the wrong way, like a bird's foot, but big as a man's. Clay Sequoia was still alive, asleep in his bed. The handprint evaporated before anyone could photograph it. The watch continued. The 5th death came on February 3rd, the 6th on February 11th. By then, the hollow was in a state of quiet panic. Families with elderly relatives began sending them to stay with kin in Cherokee or Bryson City. The sheriff's office doubled its patrols, but no officer saw anything. Dr. Tuttle decided that the only way to stop the deaths was to prove what was happening. He contacted a photographer he knew from the Asheville Citizen-Times, a man named Wendell Hobbs who had done crime scene work. Hobbs agreed to bring his equipment, a speed graphic camera with a flashbulb attachment, and sit a night watch in the home of the Hollow's oldest remaining resident, a bedridden woman named Ada Hornbuckle, age 93. Her family consented. On the night of February 28th, Dr. Tuttle, Hobbs, and Ada's grandson-in-law, Lawrence French, took up positions in the small cabin. Hobbs set his camera on a tripod facing the bedroom window from the outside. With a remote release cord he could trigger from his hiding spot behind a woodpile. Dr. Tuttle stayed inside with Ada. The moon was full, and the snow reflected a pale, flat light across the yard. At 2:47 a.m., Lawrence French, who was watching from the tree line, saw something descend into the clearing. He later gave this statement, which appears in Sheriff Mincy's file. "It came straight down out of the clouds, or from above them. I couldn't tell. It was tall, 6 feet or better, and it had wings folded on its back like a cape. It walked to the window on 2 legs that bent backwards like a bird's, but it held itself upright like a man. It didn't look at the house. It looked at the window like it knew exactly where it was going. I saw it press its face against the glass." Hobbs triggered the flash. For an instant, the clearing was flooded with white light. The creature recoiled, and Hobbs said he heard a high, piercing cry that had no business coming out of anything that size. The thing launched itself upward and was gone into the snow-bright sky before the next flashbulb could be loaded. Ada Hornbuckle survived the night. No one in Skull Camp Hollow died again that winter. The photograph was developed the next morning. It is difficult to describe without seeing it, and this newspaper has arranged for it to be displayed at the Swain County Historical Society next month. The image shows the cabin window, and pressed against the glass from the outside is a shape that is unmistakably human in posture, but irreconcilable with any human anatomy. The head is elongated, the face dominated by what appears to be a heavy, curved beak. The shoulders are draped in dark feathers that catch the flash in 1,000 points of light. One hand or claw is visible with 3 long, jointed digits splayed across the pane. The eyes are open, and they reflect the camera flash as 2 pale, disc-like circles that suggest no pupil at all. Hobbs said years later that he had photographed crime scenes, car wrecks, and 1 execution. Nothing haunted him like those 2 pale discs on the glass. Dr. Tuttle sent the feather from Amos Partridge's pillow, along with several others recovered from later deaths, to the ornithology department at Duke University. The response, dated March 14, 1960, and signed by a Dr. Philip Lassiter, stated that the feathers were of exceptional interest. Under microscopic examination, the barbules of the feathers did not interlock in the manner of any known avian species. The structure was closer, Lassiter wrote, to the keratin configuration found in mammalian hair, yet the overall morphology is undeniably that of a large flight feather. He concluded that the sample did not match any bird in the university's extensive collection. He recommended further study. The recommendation was never acted upon because the deaths had stopped and the sheriff's office quietly closed the file. After the winter of 1960, Skull Camp Hollow was different. Several families moved away. Those who stayed began gathering every year on the night of December 21st, not because anyone told them to, but because it felt like the only sensible thing to do. They keep their lights on all night. They sit with their grandparents and their aging parents. They have done it for 14 years now, and no one has died unexpectedly in that hollow on the long night. The road is still dirt. The county doesn't grade it, but the people who live there have made their peace with what they know. Before Dr. Tuttle died in 1968, he gave an interview to a small regional magazine. He was asked what he thought the creature in the photograph was. He said, "I don't know what it was, but I know what it wanted. It wanted the old ones, the ones who were close to the door already, and I know, for some reason, it didn't come back after we took its picture. Maybe we shamed it. Maybe we scared it. Maybe it just moved on." He paused, or maybe it's still out there waiting for us to forget. 3 deaths in one night, the mystery of Sugar Fork Hollow, Sugar Fork, North Carolina. In the early morning hours of March 11th, 1947, 3 elderly residents of this remote Haywood County community died within a span of 90 minutes. Each lived alone in a separate farmhouse along the same narrow valley. Each was found the following morning with no sign of a struggle, no marks of violence upon their bodies, and no identifiable cause of death. What the county coroner discovered during the subsequent autopsies has never been publicly disclosed in full, until now. After 18 months of careful investigation and interviews with surviving family members, medical personnel, and the deputies who responded to the scene, this newspaper can reveal for the first time the contents of the official postmortem findings and the testimony of a witness who has refused to speak publicly until this week. The facts are these. The hearts of all 3 victims were missing. They had been removed without any incision, puncture, or break in the skin. And every person living within 2 miles of the hollow reported hearing the same sound in the night, the cry of a raven repeated 3 times at each house, though no raven has ever been known to call at that hour or in that season. The dead were Mrs. Ada Bell Presley, 78, a widow, Mr. Jasper Coggins, 81, a retired timber cruiser, and Mrs. Frona McElrath, 89, a midwife who had delivered more than 200 babies in the county. None were related by blood, but all were lifelong residents of Sugar Fork Hollow, a deep, narrow valley bordered by the Pisgah National Forest. Each lived roughly a quarter mile from the next. Their houses stood in a straight line along the creek. On the evening of March 10th, all three were in their customary health. Mrs. Presley had been visited by her daughter, who left at sundown. Mr. Coggins was seen at dusk on his porch whittling. Mrs. McElrath spoke with a neighbor by telephone at 8:15 p.m. and gave no indication of distress. By dawn on March 11th, all three were dead. The first body was discovered by Mrs. Presley's daughter, who returned at first light to find her mother lying in bed, hands folded across her chest, eyes closed. She appeared, the daughter later told deputies, as though she had been laid out for a funeral by someone who knew her well. The bed sheets were tucked neatly under the mattress on all four sides. When the daughter telephoned for the sheriff, the line was dead. A neighbor drove to the next house, Mr. Coggins's, to find him in an identical condition, in bed, hands folded, sheets tucked. At Mrs. McElrath's house, the same scene was discovered. The doors of all three houses were found unlocked, but there were no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the wet March earth, and no indication that anything had been taken. Dr. Silas Banner, the county coroner and a physician with 30 years of experience, conducted the autopsies at the small hospital in Waynesville on the afternoon of March 11th. Present were Sheriff G.D. Wiggins, Chief Deputy Roy Frady, and a stenographer from the county clerk's office who recorded Dr. Banner's spoken observations. The coroner's report, a copy of which was obtained by this newspaper through a request to the county medical examiner's office, documents the following. On Mrs. Presley, the thoracic cavity was opened in the usual manner. The pericardial sac was found intact and undisturbed. Upon opening the sac, the heart was absent. No severing of the great vessels was evident. The aorta, vena cava, and pulmonary vessels terminated at the sac in clean, smooth ends, as though they had been sealed without suture or cauterization. There is no incision in the chest wall, neck, back, or abdomen. No surgical entry point of any kind could be identified. The report for Mr. Coggins and Mrs. McElrath is identically worded. Dr. Banner concluded each autopsy with the same sentence. I am unable to certify a cause of death. I am unable to explain the absence of the organ. Sheriff Wiggins, now retired, agreed to speak with me for this article. He said, I've investigated homicides, accidents, animal attacks, and one case of spontaneous combustion that turned out to be a kerosene fire. I have never seen anything like what Dr. Banner showed me in that examination room. He lifted the rib cage off Mr. Coggins, and there was a space in his chest where his heart should have been, and not a drop of blood in the cavity. Not a single drop. It was dry as a cupboard. Within days, as news of the death spread, a peculiar detail emerged. 17 residents of Sugar Fork Hollow and the surrounding ridges reported being awakened between 2 o'clock and 3:30 a.m. on the morning of March 11th by the cry of a raven, a loud, hoarse, repeated croaking that seemed to move from house to house. Mrs. Ola Mae Starnes, whose property adjoins the Presley farm, gave this account to Deputy Frady and repeated it to me. I woke up a little after 2. I heard a raven calling. 3 times, clear and loud, then it stopped. Then I heard it again, 3 calls a little farther away toward the Coggins place. Then again, 3 calls past that toward the McElrath house. I know ravens. They don't call at night. They don't call in March when the snow's still on the ground, and they don't fly in a straight line from house to house calling 3 times at each one like a telegraph signal. No ravens were sighted in the hollow that night. No bird was found dead or otherwise. The state game warden, who was consulted, confirmed that the common raven does not vocalize during darkness, except in extreme distress, and that the described pattern of movement was inconsistent with any known avian behavior. The investigation stalled until April 2nd, when a maintenance man named Homer Clontz climbed into the belfry of the Sugar Fork Free Will Baptist Church to repair a loose shutter damaged by a winter storm. The church stands at the head of the hollow, less than a mile from Mrs. McElrath's property. Inside the belfry, Clontz found what he first took to be a large squirrel nest. Upon closer inspection, he saw it was constructed of shredded fabric, dried grass, and small twigs woven into a bowl nearly 3 feet across. Interwoven into the nest were strips of cloth from a woman's nightgown, a man's flannel shirt, and a patterned apron. All 3 were later positively identified by family members as the bedclothes worn by the 3 deceased on the night of March 11th. Beneath the fabric embedded in the base of the nest, Clontz found a compacted mass of organic matter. The county sheriff called Dr. Banner to the scene. His examination determined that the material consisted of desiccated human cardiac muscle tissue, later confirmed by laboratory analysis in Raleigh to be from 3 distinct individuals. "I've seen a lot of things in my life," Clontz told me, his hands shaking as he sat on his porch 61 years later. "But nothing prepared me for the moment I reached into that nest and pulled out a piece of somebody's heart." The nest was photographed, cataloged, and removed to the sheriff's evidence room. The church was temporarily closed for a thorough search. No other evidence was found. The congregation met in the schoolhouse for the remainder of 1947. By the following spring, they had voted to build a new church on the opposite side of the creek, leaving the old building empty. It still stands, unlocked but avoided, the belfry boarded over by order of the county. The one person who claimed to see more than a dark shape has never spoken publicly until now. Her name is Delcy Rathbone. In 1947, she was 17 years old and living with her parents on the ridge above Mrs. McElrath's farm. She was awake in the early morning hours of March 11th, nursing a sick infant. Through her bedroom window, she saw something that she has kept to herself for 18 months. I met Mrs. Rathbone at her home in Clyde. She agreed to speak after learning that this article would be published on the anniversary of the deaths. Her statement, recorded in her own words, is as follows. "I was sitting up with the baby. The moon was bright enough to see the yard. I heard the raven call 3 times from Mrs. Presley's way, then 3 times from Mr. Coggins's, then 3 times from down near the McElrath place. Then I saw something come out of the trees at the edge of the pasture. I thought at first it was a large bird. It had wings. It had wings, big black wings that didn't flap. It glided. But below the wings there was a body like a person, thin and dark, and it was carrying something. I watched it fly directly over the house and toward the church. As it passed over, I heard it make a sound, not a bird sound. It was a voice, an old voice, and it was crying." She paused. I asked her what the voice said. "It said something in a language I didn't understand. It sounded like a question. Then it said one word I did understand. It said heart." After March 1947, the residents of Sugar Fork Hollow took precautions that had never been necessary before. Families with elderly members began sleeping in shifts, one person staying awake each night. Some nailed sheets of tin over their windows. A local tradition developed, unspoken but universally observed, that no elderly person living alone in the hollow would sleep without a lamp burning in the room. In the summer of 1947, a delegation of men from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, whose reservation lies 40 miles to the west, asked to visit the church. They were led by a respected elder who spent nearly an hour in the empty belfry. He emerged, spoke briefly with the sheriff, and departed. The sheriff never revealed what was said. The elder died 2 years later, and with him the conversation. To this day, no satisfactory explanation has been given for the deaths of Ada Bell Presley, Jasper Coggins, and Frona McElrath. The evidence of the removed hearts, the sealed vessels, the night cry of the raven, the nest in the belfry, all remain on file in the county courthouse, unsolved and to many unsolvable. The old church on Sugar Fork still stands. The belfry is boarded over, but residents say that on certain winter nights, when the moon is bright and the wind is still, you can hear the cry of a raven moving from house to house along the creek. 3 times at each window, and then silence. The Dawkins Cut train incident. On the night of November 12, 1959, a mixed freight and passenger train operated by the Tennessee and Western Carolina Railway arrived at its destination completely empty. All 16 persons aboard, crew and passengers, were missing. The train was found stopped on the Dawkins Cut Trestle, a high steel bridge spanning the Bald River Gorge. The only physical evidence recovered was a single track of cloven hoofprints leading off the bridge and into the gorge below. The missing persons case remains open. Train number 44 departed the town of Reliance, Tennessee at 6:15 p.m. on a routine 45-minute run to the small terminus at Farner. The consist included a steam locomotive, a tender, 1 boxcar of farm equipment, and a single combination passenger baggage car. The manifest listed 2 crew members and 14 passengers, all local residents returning from a farm auction. Conductor James R. Hewitt, age 61, had worked the line for 34 years. The engineer was Milton Cross, a veteran of the Tennessee and Western Carolina Railway with a spotless record. The route climbed through the Unicoi Mountains following the river. At 6:42 p.m., the dispatcher in Farner received a brief radio transmission from Hewitt. The transmission, preserved on a magnetic wire recording, lasts 11 seconds. Farner, this is Hewitt on 44. We are slowing on approach to Dawkins Cut. Something is on the trestle. I can see it in the headlight. It's on the bridge. It looks like a man, but it's not. It's not a man. We're stopping. No further transmission was received. When train 44 failed to arrive by 7:30 p.m., the dispatcher notified the railway police. A track motor car was dispatched from Farner with 2 railway policemen and the station agent. They found train 44 stopped precisely in the center of the Dawkins Cut trestle, 90 feet above the river. The locomotive was idling. The headlight and cab lights were on. The fire in the firebox was still burning. The throttle was in the closed position. No damage was visible to the engine or any car. Inside the cab, the fireman's coat lay on the seat. A half-consumed cup of coffee sat on the floor, still faintly warm. The passenger car was empty. Handbags, a folded newspaper, and unopened sack of flour from the auction were on the seats. The rear door stood open. No signs of struggle, no blood, no disorder. The only anomaly on the bridge itself was a series of impressions in a patch of cinders that had collected on a steel tie plate. The impressions were cloven hoofprints, approximately 4 inches long, with a stride measurement of nearly 4 feet. The tracks walked from the south end of the bridge to a point just aft of the passenger car, then turned abruptly and descended the steep timbered slope on the north side of the gorge. No human footprints were found anywhere on or around the bridge. The railway police summoned the Monroe County Sheriff, who organized a search of the gorge at first light. 50 men combed the slope and the river below. They found no bodies, no clothing, no sign of any person. The cloven tracks were followed for roughly 200 yards before they disappeared on a rock outcropping. A plaster cast was made. The investigation soon turned to a local man named Elmer Rigsby, a widower who had lived in a one-room shack on the south rim of the gorge for decades. Rigsby kept a herd of goats and was known to walk the trestle to move his animals between grazing areas. He had not been seen in town for over a year, but several witnesses recalled him as a quiet, solitary figure who sometimes spoke to his goats in a voice that was not quite right, too high, like he was trying to sound like something else, as one neighbor told deputies. On November 15th, search teams reached Rigsby's shack. It was empty. The goat pen beside it contained the carcasses of 11 goats, all dead. The goats showed no wounds. The county veterinarian, the same Dr. Hume who later investigated the Pine Knot Hollow incident, examined 3 of the goats. He recorded, "The animals are emaciated, similar to a condition I cannot describe. The eyes are milky but intact. I note a peculiarity. Each goat is missing 1 horn. The horn bases are smooth, as though the horns were not broken but absorbed." Inside the shack, deputies found a stack of notebooks written in pencil by Rigsby. The earliest entries dated to 1951 and concerned ordinary matters: weather, goat sales, repairs. From 1957 onward, the entries grew erratic. The sheriff's office has never released the full contents, but excerpts read at a coroner's inquest in 1960 included the following. April 3rd, 1958. One of the nannies looked at me today, and I knew she was not mine anymore. She stood up on her hind legs for a full minute. She watched me leave the pen. September 17th, 1958. Something walks the bridge at night. I hear the hooves on the ties. I stay inside. I do not look. August 2nd, 1959. I found the shirt I used to wear hanging on a tree above the river. It was clean. I have not worn that shirt in 2 years. Under it was a footprint in the mud, a goat's foot, but it walked like a man. The final entry, dated October 30th, 1959, 13 days before the disappearance, read, "It has finished what it needed from me. I am no longer required. Tonight, I will walk out onto the bridge, and I will not come back. If anyone finds these books, you will not find me. You will find what I was becoming. Do not follow the tracks." Elmer Rigsby was never found. The inquest returned an open finding on the 16 missing persons from the train. The railway company immediately suspended all passenger service on the line and abandoned the Dawkins Cut route entirely by 1961. The trestle was dismantled in 1962. The steel was sold for scrap, and the stone abutments were dynamited. The gorge is now accessible only by a rough Forest Service trail that ends at a locked gate. A small plaque mounted on a boulder near the former south abutment reads, "In memory of the 16 souls lost on this site, November 12, 1959. May they rest where no one can follow." Every year on the evening of November 12th, a small group of former railroad workers and their families gather at the Farner Depot. They light 16 lanterns and place them on the empty platform. The ceremony lasts only a few minutes. No speeches are given. The organizer, a retired brakeman named Carl Jenkins, told this magazine, "We do it because someone should. I can't tell you what happened on that bridge. I don't think anyone can. But I know what I heard on the radio that night. And I know that the people on that train left the world in a way no one has ever explained. Until someone does, the lanterns will stay lit." The plaster cast of the hoofprint remains in the evidence locker of the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, cataloged as Item 12. The case is reviewed every 5 years. It remains open. The deaths on Cold Spring Road, Bryson City, North Carolina. There is a stretch of Cold Spring Road just past the old wooden bridge over Connolly's Creek that nobody in this part of Swain County will drive after sunset. The county quit maintaining it in 1965, and the asphalt has long since surrendered to the woods. But the reason the road fell out of use has nothing to do with maintenance budgets. It has to do with a small rural clinic that once stood at the road's dead end, the Cold Spring Rest Home, and a pattern of deaths that occurred there between February and April of 1959. 12 patients died in 10 weeks, all under circumstances that a state health inspector later described as the most singular cluster of terminal events I have ever documented. The clinic was shuttered by autumn. The road was never reopened. This account is drawn from Swain County death records, the investigative files of the North Carolina State Board of Health, and interviews with the retired county coroner and a nurse who agreed after 14 years to describe what she saw. The Cold Spring Rest Home was a modest facility, 6 patient rooms, a small nursing station, a sun porch that looked out on the wooded slope of Mount Glory. It served the elderly and terminally ill from Bryson City and the surrounding hollers, patients whose families could no longer care for them at home. The head nurse was a woman named Alma Jo Harkins, a practical, no-nonsense professional who had trained in Asheville and who kept meticulous records. It is only because of her charts that the full pattern emerged. The trouble began on the night of February 8th. Patient 1 was a 74-year-old retired railroad man named Everett Suggs, admitted with advanced emphysema. He was not expected to die imminently. The admitting physician's notes described him as ambulatory, alert, oriented, prognosis guarded, but stable for weeks. At approximately 2:15 a.m., Nurse Harkins made her rounds and found Suggs dead in his bed. He was lying on his back, hands folded across his chest, eyes closed. His expression, she noted, was peaceful to the point of unusualness. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of a respiratory crisis, no lividity consistent with a prolonged death. It was as though he had simply stopped living between one breath and the next. The attending physician, Dr. Caleb Orr, signed the death certificate listing natural causes, but he wrote a brief note in the file. Decedent's skin color is peculiarly drained. The body appears to have lost a quality I cannot name. 18 days later, on February 26th, a 68-year-old woman named Flora Birchfield died in the room next door. She had been recovering from pneumonia and was, by all accounts, improving. Nurse Harkins found her at 3:10 a.m. in the same position, supine, hands folded, face serene. Dr. Orr noted a similar pallor. He asked the coroner to review the case. The coroner performed an external examination and found no evidence of neglect, trauma, or foul play. No internal autopsy was ordered. The death was listed as sudden cardiac arrest. Then came patient 3 on March 7th, patient 4 on March 12th, patient 5 on March 20th. By the end of March, 6 residents had died in the same quiet, composed manner, all between 2 and 4 in the morning. All of them had been documented as stable or improving days before. All of them exhibited the same peculiar paleness, a blanching of the skin that Dr. Orr compared to a photograph that has been overexposed. Nurse Harkins, who by then was sleeping in a cot at the nursing station, began staying awake through the entire night shift. On the evening of April 2nd, she took a cup of coffee onto the sun porch around midnight to watch the tree line. She had told Dr. Orr earlier that day that she was starting to feel like something out there was watching the clinic. She did not see anything in the woods, but at 1:45 a.m., she heard a tapping. It was coming from the window of room 4, where an 81-year-old woman named Lula Henson lay dying of stomach cancer. Henson had not spoken in 3 days. She was heavily medicated and largely unresponsive. Nurse Harkins walked the room. The tapping continued, a steady, rhythmic rap of something hard against the glass. She pulled back the curtain. There was a bird on the sill, she told state investigators later. A raven, I guess, or a crow. A big one, bigger than any crow I'd ever seen. It was looking directly in at Mrs. Henson, and it was tapping the glass with its beak in perfect time with the second hand on the wall clock. She attempted to shoo it away. It did not move. She tapped the glass from the inside. The bird tapped back. She said it stopped for a moment, cocked its head, and then did something she still struggles to describe. It lifted one wing, not like it was going to fly. It lifted the wing and pressed it flat against the window pane like a hand, like it was trying to touch her through the glass. I have worked with animals all my life, and I have never seen a bird do that. The raven stayed on the sill for another hour. At 2:47 a.m., Lula Henson exhaled once and died. The bird flew away the instant the breath left her body. Nurse Harkins wrote the time of death as 2:48 a.m. She telephoned Dr. Orr at home and told him everything. He advised her to note it in the log and promised to come first thing in the morning. Dr. Orr called the state medical examiner's office in Raleigh on April 4th. By then, 2 more patients had died, bringing the total to 9 in under 8 weeks. The state dispatched an inspector, a precise, methodical man named Hollis D. Peebles, who arrived with a coroner's assistant and a portable pathology kit. Peebles ordered full autopsies on the 2 most recent decedents. The findings, preserved in a state file that was never released to the public but was reviewed by this reporter under a records request, contain the detail that eventually sealed the clinic's doors. The hearts of both patients were abnormally small, not atrophied by disease in the ordinary sense. The tissue was intact, the arteries clear, the chambers correctly formed. But each heart had shrunk to roughly half the expected size and weight for the patient's age and body mass, as though it had been drained of substance while retaining its shape. The surrounding tissue showed no necrosis, no inflammation, no surgical intervention, and no traumatic injury. The coroner's assistant, in a handwritten addendum, noted that one of the hearts resembled the preserved specimen of an avian heart in its texture and coloration, but he was unable to explain the resemblance and did not include it in the final typed report. Peebles also examined the window of room 4. He found a fine gray residue on the outer glass, which he collected and sent to the state laboratory. The lab returned a baffling result. The residue contained a combination of keratin and uric acid, consistent with bird integument, but also significant quantities of human epithelial cells, skin cells, not blood, interwoven with the keratin at a microscopic level. The lab technician appended a question mark to the analysis and left it at that. While Peebles was conducting his investigation, a neighbor of the clinic, a farmer named Silas Presley, approached Nurse Harkins with an unsolicited observation. He said that for the past several weeks he had seen an old woman walking the ridge above the clinic at night, always around the same hour, always moving downhill toward the building. He described her as bent and gray, wearing a long, dark coat that dragged on the ground behind her. He had called out to her once, and she had turned her face toward him but had not answered. He noticed she was carrying something in one hand, a little bundle like a rag tied up with string, and it was dark and wet. What troubled Presley most, he told the nurse, was that he had lived in that hollow for 40 years and had never seen the woman before, and the ridge she was walking down had no path, no trail, and no house at the top. He went to the top of the ridge the next day, looking for a campsite, and found nothing but a single large black feather lying on a flat rock. The feather, he said, was as long as my forearm and warmer than it should have been. He kept the feather in his barn. A week later, his dairy cow died with no warning. The hide, he said, felt hollow. Nurse Harkins relayed this to Inspector Peebles, who visited Presley's farm and collected the feather. He sent it to Rowley. The lab determined it was a corvid primary feather of a size consistent with a common raven, a large one, but the calamus, the quill, was filled with a substance that the lab identified as human bone marrow. No further analysis was ordered. The feather was filed in the state evidence lockup, and according to a notation made in the log in 1966, was removed by an unknown party. Inspector Peebles completed his field report on April 22, 1959. He recommended that the Cold Spring Rest Home be temporarily closed pending a full epidemiological and environmental review. No review was ever conducted. The County Health Board voted to revoke the facility's operating license in June, citing staffing irregularities. By September, the building was empty. The owner sold the property to a logging concern, which never began work. The building was boarded up and left to rot. No charges were filed. No crime was determined to have occurred. The deaths were reclassified as natural causes etiology undetermined in the state's vital records. The families of the deceased were never told about the autopsies or the feather. The case simply faded from official view. But the people of Cold Spring Road did not forget. In the winter of 1960, a group of local men burned the empty clinic to the ground. No one claimed responsibility. No one was charged. The county declined to rebuild. The road gradually fell into disuse, and in 1965, the commissioners voted to remove it from the county maintenance map. Today, if you walk the old roadbed far enough, you can still find the clinic's stone foundation, covered in kudzu. And if you speak to anyone who grew up in this part of the county, they will tell you without hesitation why their grandparents stopped visiting the sick after dark. Nurse Alma Jo Harkins left Swain County in 1961 and never returned. She spent the rest of her career at a hospital in Ohio. In a brief telephone conversation before her death in 1979, she confirmed the details of this account, but declined to speculate on what happened at the clinic. "I am not a superstitious woman," she said. "I was trained to believe in medicine. I still believe in medicine, but medicine cannot explain why every one of those people died smiling. Medicine cannot explain why a bird pressed its wing against a window like a person saying goodbye. And medicine cannot explain where the old woman went after the last death. Because I looked for her. I drove up that ridge myself 3 days after we closed. There was nothing up there but rock and pine needles, and a circle of bare ground where nothing would grow."